Friends, thank you for being here today. I need you to stop whatever else you are doing, close your other tabs, and give me your absolute undivided attention. Because what we are about to discuss changes, fundamentally, everything we thought we understood about the geopolitical architecture of the Western world. Right now, a terrifying scenario is setting fire to the deepest, most secure communication channels of the global elite. It is a whisper echoing through encrypted signal groups among Wall Street executives, echoing in the hushed corridors of intelligence agencies in London and Berlin, and keeping diplomats awake in the dead of night. Let me be absolutely clear right at the outset. What I am about to outline is not confirmed breaking news. It is a leaked doomsday wargame, an unverified intelligence dossier, a hypothetical simulation of a nightmare that is currently paralyzing the people who run the global economy. But the sheer fact that this scenario is being discussed, that it is considered a highly plausible trajectory for the current United States administration, should freeze the blood in your veins. Before we go any further, I want to ask you, have you felt this shift in the air? Have you seen signs of this tension in your own lives or businesses? Drop a comment below and let's get a pulse on what you're seeing out there. This is not a story about standard tariffs. It is not about the ongoing, very real border disputes or the erratic threats to blockade the Gordie Howe International Bridge. Those are skirmishes. What this leaked dossier outlines is the deployment of the ultimate nuclear-level financial weapon in the American arsenal. And the target of this simulated annihilation is not a hostile rogue dictatorship. The target is Canada. I want you to let the sheer sociopathic audacity of that sink in. We are talking about the nation that shares the longest peaceful and fortified border in human history with the United States. The nation whose young men stormed Juno Beach, bleeding into the sand of Normandy mere miles from where American boys bled at Omaha. The nation that, without a second thought, opened its airspace, its airports, and its citizens' own homes to thousands of stranded, terrified Americans on the dark morning of September 11th. To frame this nation, America's most steadfast, patient, and vital ally, as a target for total financial destruction, is the ultimate act of erratic, unhinged political betrayal. It is a scenario that caters to the darkest impulses of an administration driven not by strategy, but by spite. So let us step inside this rumored simulation. Let me take you through the timeline of this geopolitical ghost story moment by moment, because the terrifying precision of these details is exactly why Wall Street is quietly panicking. Let's start exactly where this rumored timeline begins. According to the unverified dossier currently making the rounds, the catalyst for the collapse of the North American alliance happens in the dead of night. At precisely 3:17 a.m. Eastern Time, a directive is allegedly drafted by the United States Treasury Department. This is not a public executive order. It is a quiet, lethal transmission sent simultaneously to the compliance officers of every major American financial institution: J.P. Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, Citigroup, Wells Fargo. The language of this rumored midnight order is bone-chillingly simple, yet devastating in its implications. The banks are ordered to completely terminate all correspondent banking relationships with Canadian financial institutions. And the timeline for this execution? 72 hours. Not 72 days of diplomatic negotiation. Not 72 weeks of phased economic decoupling. 72 hours. Think about your own bank account for a second. Could you survive if the entire system froze in just 3 days? Tell me in the comments what your plan B would be if the banks went dark tomorrow. To understand the sheer violence of this hypothetical maneuver, we have to pull back the curtain on how the modern world actually functions. Correspondent banking sounds like an obscure, dusty term reserved for people in expensive suits trading derivatives. It is not. Correspondent banking is the central nervous system, the absolute bedrock plumbing of international commerce. Because the US dollar is the world's reserve currency, the overwhelming majority of global transactions must clear through New York. When a Canadian auto parts manufacturer in Windsor needs to pay a supplier in Germany, that money moves through a U.S. correspondent bank. When a massive Canadian pension fund wants to purchase infrastructure assets in Japan, those billions of dollars clear through Wall Street. When a Canadian family on vacation in Mexico swipes their credit card to buy dinner, that transaction pings the United States financial system. If this wargame scenario were enacted, it would not mean trade with Canada becomes slightly more expensive. It means trade becomes physically impossible. It means you instantly transform the Canadian dollar into localized, isolated paper. You freeze supply chains dead in their tracks. You don't just sanction an economy with this weapon, you economically asphyxiate it. I want you to grasp the historical heavy weight of this weapon. In the entirety of modern financial history, this level of total correspondent banking strangulation has only been fully deployed against 3 nations: Iran, North Korea, and Russia. Iran, North Korea, Russia. Those are the international pariahs, the rogue states that the entire Western consensus agreed needed to be walled off from civilization. And in this leaked doomsday simulation, the current administration in Washington decides to take a Sharpie, cross out the rules of the global order, and write Canada into that list. It is an act of pure geopolitical madness, treating a G7 partner like a terrorist syndicate. Does it shock you to see Canada's name next to North Korea's in this scenario? I want to see your reactions. Is this a wake-up call or pure fantasy? Let's talk about it below. To understand how the simulation reaches this catastrophic breaking point, the leaked intelligence delves deep into the psychological profile of the man currently occupying the Oval Office. We are looking at a hypothetical scenario driven entirely by the wounded pride of a leader obsessed with cable news chyrons and perceived personal slights, rather than a commander-in-chief weighing the strategic consequences of American hegemony. In the hours before the rumored 3:17 a.m. directive, the wargame details a desperate, deeply humiliating back-channel communication initiated by Washington. Recognizing that his aggressive tariffs and threats have backed him into a corner, the president allegedly sends an emissary to Ottawa. But he does not send the Secretary of State. He does not use the ambassador. He uses a private intermediary, a fixer, to deliver an ultimatum that reveals everything about the toxic mindset driving this crisis. The rumored message to Ottawa is this: the United States will establish a de-escalation framework to walk back the tariffs and the threats, but under one strict, non-negotiable condition. The Canadian government must stand at a podium in front of the global press corps and publicly apologize. Canada must announce that the entire trade dispute, the freezing of assets, the aggressive posturing, was all a Canadian misunderstanding. Let the sheer narcissism of that demand wash over you. The President of the United States in this scenario is not offering a diplomatic off-ramp. He is demanding that a sovereign, proud nation publicly humiliate itself on the world stage just to soothe his bruised ego. He is demanding that Canada grovel, taking the blame for his erratic policy failures. But the scenario takes a dramatic turn here, illustrating why this wargame is capturing the imagination of political strategists everywhere. The response from Prime Minister Mark Carney's government does not take days. It does not go through endless committees or focus groups. According to the lore of this leaked dossier, the response from Ottawa is transmitted back to Washington in exactly 11 minutes. In the glacial world of international diplomacy, 11 minutes is not a response time. 11 minutes is a statement of utter defiance. It means there was no debate. There was no hesitation. There was no fear. It is the diplomatic equivalent of a door being slammed in a bully's face. The response consists of a single, devastating sentence. Canada does not negotiate under coercion. No pleasantries, no counteroffers, just a wall of stoic northern resilience. It is a refusal to participate in the political theater of an unstable administration. What would you have done if you were in Carney's shoes? Would you have swallowed your pride for the sake of the economy, or was he right to stand his ground? I really want to hear your take on this one. When that 11-minute rejection reaches the Oval Office, the simulation describes a room descending into stunned silence, followed by volcanic rage. Upon reading the refusal from Prime Minister Carney, the president, completely incapable of processing rejection, reportedly utters the 5 words that set the 72-hour doomsday clock ticking. Cut them off from everything. There is no consultation with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. There is no risk assessment from the Council of Economic Advisors. There is no consideration of the millions of American jobs that rely on cross-border trade. There is only the fragile ego of one man, mobilizing the entire machinery of American financial warfare against an ally of 40 million people, simply because they refuse to bend the knee. Now, you might be wondering, how do we even know the details of this terrifying simulation? The rumor mill suggests that the existence of this 3 a.m. directive comes from a deeply placed whistleblower, a Treasury patriot. This hypothetical leaker is described not as a partisan hack, but as a senior institutionalist, a career civil servant who has served under 4 different presidents, Republican and Democrat alike. Someone who has spent their entire professional life building, managing, and protecting the immense credibility of the United States financial system. According to the rumor, this official looked at the directive, understood the apocalyptic consequences it would unleash, and decided that their oath to the Constitution and the stability of the free world mattered more than their non-disclosure agreement. By leaking this wargame to the intelligence community and financial backchannels, this official is committing career suicide to pull the fire alarm for the rest of us. Do you consider this leaker a hero or a traitor? The debate is raging in Washington. Where do you stand? Post your thoughts below. And the economic fallout predicted in this leaked dossier is nothing short of catastrophic. The wargame models exactly what happens when the 72-hour clock begins ticking. And the results prove that in trying to strangle Canada, the United States effectively shoots itself in the chest. The financial contagion model shows the Asian markets opening first. As word of the directive leaks, panic ensues. The Nikkei in Tokyo plummets. The Hang Seng in Hong Kong goes into free fall. Investors realize that if the US is willing to weaponize the dollar against Canada, no one's money is safe. By the time the sun rises over Europe, the FTSE in London and the DAX in Frankfurt are bleeding out. But the most profound carnage is modeled right at home on Wall Street. You see, the correspondent banking system isn't a charity the US runs for the world. It is a highly lucrative monopoly. Every single time a transaction passes through New York, American banks take a fee. It is a system that generates vast oceans of wealth for the United States. The doomsday model predicts that the moment the order is given, bank stocks collapse. JP Morgan plummets 7% in pre-market trading. Goldman Sachs drops 8%. Bank of America loses a staggering 11% of its value in mere hours. Why? Because financial analysts immediately calculate that cutting off Canada would instantly wipe out an estimated $14 billion in annual recurring revenue for the US banking sector. $14 billion? Vanished. Not to protect American security, but to appease a wounded political ego at 3 a.m. The wargame perfectly illustrates the hollow, self-destructive nature of the America First rhetoric when it is wielded by a man who understands nothing about how global interconnectivity actually works. Are you worried about the future of the US dollar? If it can be weaponized this easily, is it still a safe asset? Let's get a discussion going on the future of the global reserve currency. If the American action in this scenario represents the height of erratic madness, the Canadian reaction represents a masterclass in cold, calculated survival. The most thrilling, pulse-pounding section of this rumored intelligence dossier details Ottawa's immediate, overwhelming counterstrike. As the financial world realizes what Washington has done, the wargame details Prime Minister Carney taking an unprecedented step. At 4 a.m., under the harsh, humming fluorescent lights of Parliament Hill, an emergency session of the Canadian Parliament is convened. I want you to picture the historical weight of this hypothetical scene. Members of Parliament pulled from their beds, rushing into the chambers in jeans and heavy coats, the air thick with exhaustion, adrenaline, and the profound realization that the American security umbrella has just collapsed. This is only the 4th emergency session of this kind in Canadian history, the last being the immediate aftermath of 9/11. Standing before the chamber, unscripted and resolute, the Prime Minister reportedly unveils a 3-pronged retaliatory masterstroke designed not just to absorb the blow, but to permanently alter the balance of global power. The first major move in this counterstrike is the enactment of a so-called Financial Sovereignty Act. Knowing the US dollar is being weaponized against them, Canada immediately passes emergency legislation to bypass it entirely. The Bank of Canada is authorized to establish direct bilateral currency settlement lines with the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, and the Bank of England. The message is clear. If the US won't let us use the dollar, we will build a new road. And the terrifying thing for Washington in this simulation is that once this new non-dollar infrastructure is built, it never, ever goes away. The retaliation wouldn't stop at defense. It would actively target the American balance sheet through a massive asset repatriation. The Prime Minister orders the immediate, ruthless withdrawal of all Canadian government financial assets held in United States institutions. Every bond, every Treasury yield, every reserve deposit. Approximately $380 billion is ordered to be violently ripped out of the American financial system in a matter of days. The liquidity shock to U.S. markets would be a localized earthquake, sending borrowing costs for ordinary Americans skyrocketing. And then comes the final move, the one that causes national security advisors in the Pentagon to break into a cold sweat. As the sun rises, the rumor dictates that Prime Minister Carney places a deliberate, highly visible, and very secure phone call to the governor of the People's Bank of China. He doesn't have to announce a formal alliance. He doesn't have to abandon Western democratic values. The mere existence of the phone call is a geopolitical shockwave. It sends a deafening message across the Potomac. You are pushing us into the arms of your greatest strategic rival. If you sever us from the West, we will integrate with the East, and you will lose your northern flank forever. The China call, is it a brilliant defensive move or a dangerous gamble that could backfire? I'm dying to know what you think about this strategic pivot. Comment below. This is the ultimate consequence modeled in the 72-hour rumor. By attempting to bully Canada over a petty trade dispute, the United States administration shatters the illusion of American reliability. The Global South, European allies, and Asian partners watch this simulation play out and realize the US dollar is no longer a neutral reserve currency. It is a loaded gun pointed at the head of anyone who disagrees with the president. The credibility of the American financial empire suffers a generational, perhaps terminal wound. Let's talk about what happens in Washington while Ottawa is rewriting the global financial order. The leaked wargame doesn't just model international chaos, it models a domestic political and institutional fracture unseen since the darkest days of the Nixon administration. By 9 a.m. on the first day of the 72-hour countdown, the simulation predicts an unprecedented full-scale mutiny on Capitol Hill. We are not just talking about the usual opposition voices releasing sternly worded press releases. The dossier outlines a scenario where sitting senators from the president's own party, powerful figures, representing border states like Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York, whose local economies are inextricably chained to Canadian cross-border trade, stage a very public, very vocal revolt. When the CEOs of major American automotive manufacturers, energy companies, and agricultural conglomerates call their senators and explain, in sheer panic, that their supply chains will literally cease to exist in 48 hours, partisan ideology evaporates. Economic survival takes over. The war game envisions a bipartisan emergency delegation marching down Pennsylvania Avenue, threatening to use every legislative mechanism available, including immediate articles of impeachment, if the directive isn't rescinded. Because suddenly, this isn't about political theater or cable news ratings. It is about the instantaneous vaporization of the American working class. Do you think American politicians would actually stand up to the president if the money stopped flowing? Or is the party loyalty too strong? I want to see a debate on this in the comments. But the most terrifying reaction in the simulation doesn't come from the politicians. It comes from the Pentagon. Inside the Department of Defense, the 3:17 a.m. directive is treated not as a financial maneuver, but as a catastrophic, self-inflicted national security breach. You have to understand the profound military integration between the US and Canada. We share NORAD. We share the North Warning System. Canadian military officers sit deep inside the bunkers of Cheyenne Mountain, actively commanding American troops. The simulation details a frantic, highly classified morning briefing where the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff storms into the Oval Office. The military's message in the war game is blunt and terrifying. You cannot economically nuke a nation that serves as our primary early warning radar against Russian and Chinese intercontinental ballistic missiles. The war game models a scenario where the U.S. military leadership point blank informs the commander-in-chief that treating Canada as a hostile financial entity critically compromises the physical defense of the American homeland. If Canada pulls its officers, if Ottawa decides to restrict airspace, halt joint naval patrols in the Arctic, or sever data sharing in response to the economic blockade, the United States is suddenly flying blind across its entire vast northern exposure. Furthermore, the leaked dossier simulates the quiet, lethal maneuvers of the global intelligence community. The Five Eyes Intelligence Sharing Alliance, comprising the US, UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, is instantly thrown into an existential crisis. If the United States is willing to financially execute Canada over a trade dispute, London, Canberra, and Wellington immediately realize their own classified data and economic assets are no longer safe in American hands. The simulation predicts that within 24 hours of the directive, the UK and Australia begin quietly establishing shadow intelligence backchannels with Ottawa, deliberately excluding Washington from the loop. The United States doesn't just lose its closest ally, it isolates itself from the most sophisticated, deeply integrated intelligence network on the planet, leaving it deaf and blind to imminent global threats. This is the true cascading failure modeled in the 72-hour rumor. It's not just about the velocity of money. It's about the rapid, uncontrollable unraveling of the entire American security apparatus, triggered by a petty, impulsive demand for a public apology. The president expects a swift capitulation, but the war game proves that the resulting shockwaves would fracture the very foundation of American power, both at home and abroad. Friends, we must now step back from the brink. We must pull ourselves out of the simulation, out of this terrifying doomsday war game, and return to the waking world. Let me reiterate, the 72-hour correspondent banking cutoff remains, as of this moment, an unverified rumor. It is a ghost story told by intelligence analysts and Wall Street quants. There is no confirmed midnight directive. But, and this is the most important thing you will hear today, the danger this war game represents is absolutely, undeniably real. We are living in an era where the unthinkable has become routine. Look at the verifiable facts right in front of us. We are currently watching the United States president openly threaten to blockade the Gordie Howe International Bridge, the vital artery of North American manufacturing. We are watching him slap aggressive, punitive tariffs on Canadian industries for cheap political theater. We are watching an administration that fundamentally views allies not as partners, but as subservient vassals to be extorted. The leaked 72-hour scenario might be a hypothetical simulation, but the psychological instability, the vindictiveness, and the blatant disregard for historical alliances that it models are entirely factual. They are on display in Washington every single day. This wargame serves as a profound, flashing red warning light for every Canadian and for anyone who supports the stability of the free world. It proves one inescapable truth. Canada can no longer rely on the goodwill, the sanity, or the friendship of its southern neighbor as long as this administration holds power. The era of the polite, quiet, accommodating neighbor must end. The illusion that shared history and shared blood at Normandy will protect Ottawa from Washington's wrath is dead. Canada must build its economic armor right now. It must diversify its trade, harden its financial sovereignty, and prepare for the worst. Because while the 72-hour doomsday scenario might just be a whisper on Wall Street today, the bully next door has already shown us who he is. He has already shown us he is standing in the living room with a can of gasoline. We do not have the luxury of waiting to see if he strikes the match. So, here's my final question for you. Is the US-Canada alliance beyond repair, or is there still hope to fix this? I'll be reading every single comment on this one. Let's talk. Thank you for watching. Keep your eyes open, stay vigilant, and never take the stability of tomorrow for granted.